Hey guys, this is Tyler here in Estonia, and I'm going to discuss something here, and I think it's very relevant, and I've spoken about this before on this area, and that is the current state of affairs here in Estonia. Now, many of you people may know that Estonia, the new prime minister just came into office. It's actually a woman, so now their PM, prime minister, and president are both women. They're two leaders. And many people here may also be aware that the equivalent of Congress here now also has a very large percentage of women running the government. And this is just one factor of many why I believe Estonia is setting itself up for a course of destruction, as it's already been on now for some time. I've spoken about this before. This girl power movement isn't anything new to Estonia. In fact, I would actually say that feminism is just as powerful here as it would be in Finland and in other Western European countries. People might be surprised by that, but I say that based on many objective factors. This is certainly a telling sign of the country. People often, they like to isolate their leaders from the people of the country. They look at them as being in a different category, and that somehow leaders just end up in positions of power. And yes, we can look at the U.S. Biden was recently elected. Was there a lot of corruption? Likely. But on a Congress level, where there may have been some corruption, we also saw a lot of seats taken by Democrats, Senate, House of Reps. In all of these areas, if all the Democrats were elected, there must be some trend here. And I think it does also display that there were a lot of Democrats that did support both Biden and these congressmen, unfortunately. And this is just how the country's at. There's obviously very polarizing viewpoints now in the U.S. And I often tell people that it's almost like 2 or 3 different countries, in fact, now in the U.S. It amazes me that this is classified as one country. In most other parts of the world, these would be different countries by this point, especially here in Europe. These would be separated countries. It's just madness that this is still... But getting back to Estonia is that Estonia now has 2 other major leaders are women. And this, of course, like I was talking about with the U.S. political people, this is clearly indicative of the feelings and the tendencies of people here in Estonia, that they indeed desire having women leaders running their country. It's important that people don't isolate, they don't separate their leaders from the people, because often the leaders, in fact, do also heavily impact people. And as we know, leaders are meant to serve people. They're meant to serve us. It's not vice versa. Even though that's the common mantra, you would think that the people are supposed to serve political leaders. It's not like that, or it's not supposed to be like that in democratic governments. But that's what we see more of. Note, though, that here in Estonia, these are what I would call kind of derivative countries, derivative societies, where many of the policies that are happening in North America and Western Europe often are directly then implemented here. This is manifested in so many areas of life here in Estonia. Just go back to the 1990s. Look at photos of how Estonia looked. It was very Soviet looking compared to now. They became essentially a derivative country of North America and Western Europe, of here in Eastern Europe. Much of the culture, due to entertainment, due to media, due to government, and all these different influencers are now reflective in what you see here in Estonia. And it's not a good course, honestly. It really is. And unfortunately, I think men are being really pushed out. They're being really segmented out of society here. It's very evident in many areas of life. I've spoken about the problems of relationships in previous videos here. The dating and relationship situation for foreign guys is nothing like it used to be here even 20 years ago. Completely different based on many accounts of what guys have told me. And it's also worsening for domestic guys here. for younger guys, Generation Z. I meet more and more Generation Z Estonian men who either have lots of problems with relationships, who can't find girlfriends, who can't date, who just want to experience something. I understand that this isn't the end-all be-all, but they at least want to experience something. And these guys are having similar problems to what we'd see in North America and Western Europe. So the problems obviously are also showing up here. I think Estonia, in some ways, it's a mentality that's based on libertarian kind of principles, and not in all walks of life. Unfortunately, though, when they elect more and more women into their government running their country, as we know, tendencies of females in places of power is quite the opposite. And often they start, essentially, it's like almost like a high school environment. It's like babysitting basically on the population. And it's just totally unnecessary often. Guys should be let to do what they do best, and just as females can also carry on their respective lives. There shouldn't be a lot of overhead. There shouldn't be a lot of oversight in people's lives. Unfortunately, what happens, like here in Estonia, there were a few cases of recent corruption. Corruption happens everywhere in government, and people have to realize that a lot of the people that go into power are not going for the right reasons. And as I was saying before, they should be serving people, we shouldn't be serving them, but that mindset's out the door now. There were recent cases of corruption here in Estonia. I think it helped usher in this whole wave of women, new women leaders here, women prime minister. It gave them a sense of like justification. These cases of corruption, I believe often they give people the impression that women are going to be a lot more straightforward, more honest, which actually isn't often the case. They will, of course, comply with whoever is above them, but that could be really bad policies they're enforcing. There was a recent situation in Iceland, I believe it was 5 or 10 years ago, and what happened is that Iceland had some cases of corruption, and their leaders ended up, there were many leaders. It was on both a private and government level. They were involved with some big corruption cases, and what happened is that these were mostly male leaders, and they replaced them with mostly women leaders. Now the reports were that installing all this wave of women would drastically help the corruption situation in government and in private life or in corporate life, which maybe it did. That does not mean though that it made this overall society better. It made it operate better, because the thing is often people look at this too much like it's a bandage. They're trying to put a bandage on the situation rather than going for what are the core underlying reasons. Why isn't there more integrity and more uprightness on a personal level, and then move up from that. They often just look at this is going to be a great replacement, and it's more like a bandage. It doesn't really actually fix the core problem. So they use the cases of corruption to oust leaders. In one case with one of these Estonian leaders, he was very, very supportive of, I believe, what was a more libertarian and economically sound and just a more free model for Estonia. And unfortunately, he got involved with some things and he was ousted. And this is often what happens in politics, is that they use these situations to oust the person. If they see them as being too much of this draining the swamp mentality, they don't like that often, and certainly not in governments and countries that don't desire these Western models. These cases, these situations are perfect opportunities for them to usher in a lot of these leaders that they can both easily rule are females and among other things. And this is what's happened here. So what likely will happen, like here in Estonia, is I think that taxes will actually rise quite a bit in coming years. With all these two leaders running the show now that are women, and then you have a lot of the equivalents of Congress people that are also women. It's setting a very bad course for the country, but that's where they're at. And like I said, the door was open. We can look over to Russia, very close to here, and with President Putin, he obviously has had a lot of corruption accusations thrown at him. Maybe some of it's true, but at the same time, one has to look at the whole picture. Where's the country on a whole at? What's the core? And how is it for the future? Because that's a big key here. It's not just here in the present moment. And I think where they're driving like Estonia now is nothing like what it was, say, in the 1990s. It was certainly more of a like for Estonia, pro-Estonia kind of country. And now it's more of just like they've sold out to international banking and finance and stuff. And whatever enables them to receive more funds from like EU, from NATO, from North America. Many people may not know, like Estonia received almost $500 million fund from back in the summertime when the whole epidemic was going on. That was given to Estonia, and it was mostly designed for private and public enterprise. It was for so that businesses could continue running, pay their employees for infrastructure projects so that those could continue in some other government-led projects. And as is often the case, there was a good amount that was most likely not used for that. And that's a problem often. I've spoken about this before with very small countries. These countries, relative to the population size, can receive very large sums of money. If you did the breakdown, and if the country postures itself in a certain way, and they kind of meet all these blanks that need to be met, essentially they can get whatever they want. And it's also why they're part of these larger bodies like EU or NATO, so that they can benefit from all of what's to come from that. But often it can unfortunately have bad impact on the overall country. In Estonia's case, one of the things that how they do this is by having this very large, like this girl power like movement that's now, it seems, as big here as it is like in Finland or in Germany. As we know, having these kind of movements greatly helps to position the country in a way to receive a lot of funds from Western countries, from these governing bodies. It looks good. And then, of course, the effects happen in the society. So then you have all these government jobs, all this private sector enterprise that they have to employ so many female workers. It just messes up the whole gender dynamics in a country. Like Better Bachelor has spoken about, females still have very high standards per hypergamy and per what's biological attraction. So men still have to meet certain standards. They still have to make X times more than what the woman would make in a country. And naturally, if the economic environment is inflated for females, that can't happen. And then obviously that has a lot of impact on other aspects of society. And also, like, taxes are another big thing. Females by and large often really like high taxes for many obvious reasons. And those high taxes also have a lot of impact on the social environment, the economic environment of the country. It incentivizes a lot of bad behavior and people not to work as hard, people to live off of others, not to live certain ways. There's a lot of illegitimate children often born, and it just does wreak havoc on the country. That's the progression that we often see here. I think with President Biden in office now, this is going to incentivize European countries, European Union, to continue the course of what they're on, which isn't good. Estonia, I think, for example, they should get out of the European Union at some point eventually. I really wish that the Slavic-based countries would have a Slavic alliance. Okay, many Estonians, if you inquire to them, they don't consider themselves Slavic. Even though their countries are conjoined to a lot of Slavic places, or they're very close to Slavic countries, they could certainly have a Slavic alliance with these countries. And I think it would be more natural, and it would be more practical for the country. But as I've mentioned before, this is a common issue with small countries. Economically, they're often good, but in other areas of life, there's often negative outlets. I think for any small country, though, the main thing is that they have to align somehow with the countries around them. What are whether it's like a Slavic alliance, a Germano alliance, a Southeast Asian alliance, or North African alliance. I think this is a more practical solution. Unfortunately, what happens, like Western countries like US come in, they intentionally like keeping these regions under their hands. They like keeping them in a state of kind of paranoia, in conflict with the big, large empire countries close to them, like in Estonia's case, Russia, and then kind of use these places as buffer states for their own plans. It's very nefarious and unfortunate because some of these countries do have very, very positive things and better potential there, and also culturally speaking. But it's real tricky. So we'll see what the path of Estonia is and how these new leaders lead this country. But otherwise, give me your feedback below. Thank you.